By the mid-1950s, the RAAF started to consider a replacement for the Australian-produced CAC Sabre. A joint evaluation team from the Departments of Air and Supply toured Europe and North America in 1960 to consider Australia's options. At the top of the list was the American Lockheed F-104 Starfighter and the French Dassault Mirage 3. In March 1961, following an intensive sales effort by the French, the Mirage was chosen as the first supersonic fighter for Australia. An order for 30 was placed, with subsequent orders seeing the number increase to 100 Mirage 3O fighter bombers and 16 Mirage 3D two-seat operational trainers. When Australia made the order, there was an engine choice between the French Snecma ATAR 9C or the Rolls-Royce Avon turbojets, the latter already in RAAF service powering both the Sabre and the Canberra, but not with afterburner. Rolls-Royce worked with Dassault to offer the Avon Mirage for the RAAF, and the fourth production Mirage 3C was subsequently fitted with an afterburning Avon G7 turbojet. This variant was identified as a Mirage 3O and first flew on the 13th of February 1961. Dassault proposed the designation of 3O for Australia, with an O rather than an A, as the suffix letter A had already been allocated to other pre-production Mirage airframes. Despite delivering superior performance, the Avon-powered variant was too expensive, and Dassault converted the Avon version to one with an ATAR 9C engine, of which the rest of the Australian Mirages would be based. The first of these aircraft was built in France and flew at Bordeaux on the 14th of March 1963. It was then handed over to the RAAF at Villaroche, near Paris, on the 9th of April. Two further aircraft were shipped to Australia, with assembly completed by the Government Aircraft Factories, GAF, the Australian prime contractor. French production would be reduced, with increasing amount of Australian construction and assembly by GAF and the Commonwealth Aircraft Corporation, CAC, with the 16th airframe onward regarded as Australian-built. Number 75 Squadron became the first operational unit to be equipped with Mirages in 1965, followed by Number 76 Squadron in 1966. In 1967, Number 75 Squadron deployed to Malaysia to replace Number 3 Squadron, which then became the first unit to equip with the ground attack version of the Mirage under Wing Commander Jake Newham. When 3 Squadron returned to Butterworth in 1969, Number 77 Squadron re-equipped and became the 4th RAAF Mirage Squadron. Australia's 101st Mirage, the 3D, was a two-seater and first flew on the 6th of October 1966. A further 9 trainers followed over the next year. This version replaced the nose radar with avionics to allow room for a second cockpit behind the first. These trainers were assembled by GAF from imported French-built fuselages and CAC-built wings and vertical tail surfaces. 6 more of these trainers were ordered, enabling the retirement of the Sabre from operational fighter training by 1974. With defence cuts under the Whitlam government, 76 Squadron was disbanded in August 1973. The remaining 3 squadrons continued operating the Mirage from Williamtown and Butterworth. Several Mirage aerobatic teams were also formed during its service, with 77 Squadron, the Deltas in 1971 and the Miracles in 1976, and for the RAAF's Diamond Jubilee in 1981, a 3-aircraft team of red, white and blue aircraft. Here is former RAAF Mirage pilot Mike Tardant describing his experience flying the aircraft.
With experience, great aircraft. As a junior guy, pretty scary aircraft. We were lucky we had 2-seaters, unlike the Sabre where you just strapped one to your bum and went flying. 2-seaters, you did a few 2-seat rides before you went solo. Very good performance, very ancient cockpit in terms of layout. There were a lot of weapons applications where you physically had to change hands to make selections and stuff. So it was an ergonomic nightmare. Very poor cockpit lighting. It had World War II ultraviolet and infrared lighting. And it had a very high approach speed. Approach speed on finals of 190 knots for a light aircraft, over the fence at 175 knots for touchdown. not an easy airplane to see out of because it was a delta wing, very high nose angle. Almost impossible to see out when it was raining. The rain would just obscure the front panel you look through. And you had to sort of kick it off to the side a bit, the rudder, and look around the side. It didn't really stall as such, it mushed. So a normal aircraft would have a lift drag coefficient, a lift that went like sudden like that. The Mirage went like that. So in a Mirage, instead of it stalling and dropping, you got on the back of the drag curve, and the more and more power you applied had a little less and less effect until you were in fact in a deep stall, but full power wouldn't get you out of. Not a classic aeroplane stall at all, but nonetheless one that could get you into trouble. It wasn't an easy aircraft to become comfortable in, and it was particularly so at night. And we traditionally had the habit of flying this thing at night on every second Thursday pay night. After a day's flying, there'd be 1, 2, maybe 3 aircraft left over from the flying, so 3 unlucky sods would get to strap this thing to their bum and launch off into the dark. By the time they'd flown the first sortie, there'd be no serviceable ones left for the second wave. So those guys, everyone would retreat to the bar and recount their scary experiences. So nobody liked flying this thing at night. I went to 76 Squadron, having a great old time there. I was up in Darwin when the Whitlam government announced some big military cutbacks, one of which was 76 Squadron being disbanded. So I flew the last 76 Mirage formation home from Darwin. You've got to bear in mind this was just after the 72 air show, where we'd had the Deltas flying 7 aircraft formation, which is absolutely magnificent stuff. So the Mirage was in its heyday, and we were bitterly disappointed. That had a flow-on effect. I mean, there was a CO, 3 flight commanders, fighter combat instructor. So there were a lot of appointments that disappeared out of the promotion pool, which would have an impact on those of us who were left.
The Mirage in Australian service never fired its weapons in anger. Its period of service was characterised by the continued presence of, usually, 2 Mirage squadrons at Butterworth as part of Australia's contribution to the 5 power defence arrangements. Given a nominal fatigue life of 3,000 flying hours per airframe, the Australian Mirage was to be retired by 1979. However, RAAF operations took a greater toll on fatigue life than expected due to higher use than other air forces and intensity of low-level air-to-ground operations. Australia's Aeronautical Research Laboratories, ARL, designed boron fibre repair patches to prevent wing cracks from spreading and extended wing life by reskinning or replacing wings during the late 1970s. This was a time when the fleet was also being upgraded with improved avionics, ejection seats, and air-to-air missile systems. Some Australian Mirages flew over 4,000 hours. Here is former RAAF Mirage pilot Ron Hack talking about some of the characteristics of the aircraft.
Because this one is delta wing, it had extremely sensitive roll stability, if you like. It's not quite the right term, but it would roll rapidly, and it had no real ability to return to wings level. So that was one of the challenges when you're operating at night in weather. You could wind up upside down without realising you've rolled upside down. It would roll at about 360 to 420 degrees per second, so to give you an idea of how delicate it was in roll. Whereas the F-18 being a more straight wing aeroplane, it only rolled about 180 degrees per second, and it had some good dihedral stability and some good roll stability, so it would actually hold wings level without you thinking about it, without you actually making it hold wings level. So that was one of the big differences. But the other big difference between the two aeroplanes was the F-18 had good systems. It had good radios, had plenty of fuel, had 2 good engines, and it could do the job comfortably. So to a large extent, it was much more of a carefree aeroplane than the Mirage. The F-18 also had a navigation system, so you knew where you were. So you knew how much fuel you had, how much excess fuel you had to go and do the job. Whereas the Mirage didn't have a navigation system as such, so it was dead reckoning. So there was a lot of a lot of mental gymnastics to try and calculate how far away you are from a landing field, how much fuel I got left, how much fuel am I burning, and you're doing those mental gymnastics the whole time in a flight with this thing. And we used to carry big tanks under the wings. We could carry 3 of them, and the aeroplane would go for 4 hours with those tanks on. So, and other times you carry no fuel tanks, just a clean aeroplane, it would last for about 25 minutes. So quite a big difference, whereas the F-18 with internal fuel would go for 2 hours. The other thing with this radar, we used to do stuff low level, looking for targets low level with the radar, and being an old analog type radar, the ground clutter would cloud out your radar image. So we spent a lot of time with the radar control stick manipulating the antenna elevation to try and break out the targets in the side lobes, the radar side lobes. So you can imagine flying around at night at 1,000 feet at 600 knots, trying to work the radar, head down the bucket, working the radar and the antenna elevation, trying to break out a Canberra target or another Mirage or an F-111 in the side lobes. A lot of risk and a lot of effort, just staying alive basically. It was a challenge, as I said. That was the beauty of the aeroplane. That's probably why we all loved it. It was just a big challenge. The tank here, if you could turn the camera around, that's what's called an RPK-10. It's a supersonic tank, so it's good for Mach 1.9. But it also carries 4 500-pound bombs. You can see the weapon stations on the side of it. So that gave the aeroplane quite a good load. With those 2 tanks like that and a centerline tank, you go probably a range or a radius of about 400 miles, nautical miles, so 800 kilometres. You carry 10 weapons, which is not a bad load for an old delta wing aeroplane. The way aeroplanes measure airspeed is through what they call a pitot tube. As you can imagine, when you're flying through the air impacts in the tube here through the orifice in the nose. So what we're doing in airspeed measurement is measuring the actual pressure of the air that's being felt by a sensor in this tube. The trouble is, as we go in altitude, the static pressure around us changes. As you know, down at sea level it's 14 pounds per square inch or 10-13 millibars. Up at 40,000 feet it's only half that. So we've also got to measure the static pressure, that is the outside air pressure. And that's what these little ports here do, because they're in stagnation points on this shape, and they just measure the static pressure. So you take this here measures the dynamic pressure plus the static pressure. You then measure the static pressure, take it away, that leaves your dynamic pressure, which is your airspeed. I mentioned that Mirage has a complex intake. As you get past about Mach 1.2, this little cone here moves forward. The idea is it creates a shock wave on the tip, and it's the idea that as you go faster, the shock wave goes more oblique, and you want to keep the shock wave out of the intake. A little aerodynamic knowledge is all the air behind a shock wave is subsonic, and these early engines couldn't handle supersonic air. So we had to keep the air going down the intake, subsonic. So that's what that does. And not only that, see, it gets bigger, it closes down the intake as well. So that reduces the amount of air going through the engine, reduces the drag, therefore you can go faster. And that's all it is. It's not to do with thrust or anything, it's just simply the intake design. Same on the Concorde, same on the F-111.
Number 77 Squadron finally relinquished their Mirages for Hornets in November 1987. Number 79 Squadron operated the Mirage until disbanding in April 1988, leaving 75 Squadron at Darwin and the Aircraft Research and Development Unit at Edinburgh as the remaining operators. In early September 1988, 75 Squadron flew a formation of Mirages over the East Coast state capitals as a farewell gesture before the aircraft ceased squadron operations later that month on the 30th. In 1990, Pakistan purchased 50 RAAF Mirages, comprising 42 single-seaters and 8 two-seaters, and 5 incomplete airframes. Of these, 45 were taken into operational service with the Pakistan Air Force, and about 2/3 of them were upgraded to retrofit of strike element configuration, or ROSE 1, by 1998. The Mirage saw longer service in RAAF frontline than any other fighter before the FA-18 Hornet. While over 40 were lost in flying accidents, those who flew it held the type in high regard and is still remembered today as a remarkable aircraft.